Best known for playing Xander Harris on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Nicholas Brendon spent years battling alcoholism, addiction, and repeated legal troubles. Over the next decade, he was arrested multiple times on charges including vandalism, theft, prescription fraud, and domestic violence, and publicly admitted to multiple suicide attempts while discussing his struggles on Dr. Phil. In 2021, severe spinal problems left him temporarily paralyzed from the waist down, and he later suffered a heart attack caused by a congenital heart defect. Brendon died from cardiovascular disease in his sleep in 2026 at just 54 years old. In 2003, 46-year-old pizza delivery driver Brian Wells robbed a bank in Pennsylvania while wearing a metal collar bomb locked around his neck, telling police he was forced to do it. Minutes after officers detained him, the bomb exploded before it could be safely removed, killing him instantly on live television. Investigators later concluded that Wells had knowingly participated in the robbery plot, although they also believed he didn't expect the bomb to be real or to actually kill him. Several co-conspirators were later convicted, making the collar bomb case one of America's strangest botched robberies. During the recent earthquakes in Venezuela, security cameras captured a terrifying race against time. Several people can be seen sprinting down the final flights of stairs as the building starts shaking violently. Seconds later, the entire structure starts collapsing behind them, reducing it to a massive pile of rubble as they escaped by mere moments. The powerful earthquakes caused widespread devastation across the country, destroying thousands of buildings and leaving more than 1,000 people dead, with many more displaced or injured. This was the moment a man was in serious danger of becoming a polar bear's next meal. After spotting the massive predator charging toward him, he sprinted for his snowmobile as the bear rapidly closed the distance. Just as he managed to start the engine, the roar of the snowmobile made the bear hesitate for just a split second. That brief pause gave him just enough time to speed away to safety. Polar bears are the only bears known to actively stalk and hunt humans as prey, making encounters like this among the most dangerous in the animal kingdom. Here's some incredible footage of something you never see after a major sporting event. Thousands of fans voluntarily staying behind to clean the stadium. These spectators had just finished watching Japan play, but instead of heading for the exits, many remained in the stands collecting trash and wiping down their sections. The tradition is deeply rooted in Japanese culture, where cleaning shared spaces is often viewed as a basic responsibility and a sign of respect for others. In Japan, many students even help clean their own schools instead of relying on janitors. The result is scenes like this, where entire sections of a packed stadium are left looking almost untouched long after the final whistle. Here's a rare look at one of the most elusive underwater creatures on Earth. Captured more than 5,000 feet beneath the ocean's surface near an offshore oil rig, this giant deep staria jellyfish looks less like a real animal and more like something straight out of a horror movie. Its enormous translucent body and dark ghostly appearance have led many people to compare it to a Dementor from Harry Potter. Unlike most jellyfish, Deep Staria lacks long tentacles and instead uses its massive bell as a living net, wrapping itself around prey in the darkness of the deep sea. Because they inhabit some of the most inaccessible regions of the ocean, sightings are extremely rare, and scientists still know surprisingly little about how these mysterious animals live and reproduce. This Russian woman experienced what may be a worst-case scenario while riding an elevator. Just moments after the doors closed, the elevator's power unit suddenly exploded, sending flames shooting from the control panel and filling the small cabin with thick smoke. Trapped inside with nowhere to go, she was suddenly confined inside a metal box filling with fire and toxic fumes. In enclosed spaces, smoke inhalation can become deadly long before the flames themselves, with a lack of oxygen and exposure to toxic gases causing people to lose consciousness within minutes. As the damage continued to spread, the woman could do nothing but wait and hope for the elevator to reach a floor. Fortunately, the doors eventually opened, allowing her to escape the nightmare. This diver came terrifyingly close to being swallowed by a whale. He was swimming among a dense school of fish when a massive mouth suddenly emerged from the darkness beside him. The whale narrowly missed pulling him completely into its mouth, instead just stealing one of his flippers as it surged past. But despite how terrifying it looked, the whale likely never intended to target him. Baleen whales are filter feeders that feed on fish and krill, and while their mouths are enormous, their throats are typically the size of a human fist, far too small to swallow an adult. Had he been engulfed, he likely would have been trapped inside the whale's mouth for a few terrifying moments before being spat back out as the whale filtered its catch. However, had he been dealing with a sperm whale, this would have been a much different story. This was the moment a jogger suddenly shoved the woman into the path of an oncoming double-decker bus and then kept running. Footage from London's Putney Bridge shows the woman being pushed directly into traffic just seconds before the bus reached her. Miraculously, the driver swerved just in time, missing her by inches and preventing what could have been a horrific death. The shocking footage sparked a massive manhunt, but despite clear video of the incident, police couldn't identify the runner. For years, the mystery remained unsolved as investigators searched tirelessly for the man responsible. Nearly a decade later, authorities finally tracked him down and revealed his identity: Nicholas Brandrum, a wealthy investment banker. He was soon arrested in 2025 and ultimately convicted of assault. This was the moment Dutch aerobatic pilot Noreen Melkomjohn came terrifyingly close to being ripped from her aircraft thousands of feet above the ground. During a high-speed aerobatic flight, the plane's canopy suddenly burst open and shattered, blasting her with hurricane-force wind and flying debris. The force was so intense that she temporarily lost vision in one eye and struggled to breathe, yet she somehow maintained control of the aircraft while continuing to perform emergency procedures. Despite the severe wind pressure and the constant risk of losing control, Noreen managed to safely land the plane and walked away alive from an incident that easily could have turned fatal within seconds. Before becoming famous as Dracula, Saruman, and Count Dooku, Christopher Lee witnessed the last public execution in France. In 1939, while visiting Paris as a teenager, he joined a crowd gathered outside a prison to watch convicted serial killer Eugene Weidman be executed by guillotine. Lee later recalled the atmosphere as disturbing, describing spectators climbing onto roofs just for a glimpse of the execution. Because the crowd became so unruly and the spectacle was described as shameful, the French government banned executions immediately following Weidman's death. During the Chechen Wars, Surgeon Kasan Bayev was reportedly the only doctor serving nearly 80,000 civilians in parts of war-torn Chechnya. As artillery strikes and bombings flooded makeshift hospitals with casualties, Bayev often worked for days without sleep, performing amputations, emergency brain surgeries, and other life-saving procedures with little anesthesia and makeshift medical tools. During one particular 48-hour period, he reportedly carried out 67 amputations and 8 brain surgeries. Refusing to choose sides, he treated wounded Chechen fighters, Russian soldiers, and civilians alike, leading to both sides accusing him of helping the enemy and threatening him with death. In 2022, Fiona Hooker developed a rare pregnancy complication that essentially made her body allergic to her own unborn baby. At 31 weeks pregnant, a few itchy spots around her belly button rapidly spread into agonizing blisters that eventually covered much of her body. Doctors later diagnosed her with pemphigoid gestationis, a rare autoimmune disorder affecting roughly 1 in every 50,000 pregnancies. They believe genes inherited from her son's father caused her immune system to mistake proteins linked to her baby and placenta as a threat, triggering an aggressive attack on her own skin. The pain became so severe that after giving birth, she struggled to even hold her newborn son without agony. Although the blisters eventually subsided, the condition can flare up again with future pregnancies, hormonal changes, or even her menstrual cycle for the rest of her life. In the early 1900s, New Jersey Asylum director Henry Cotton became convinced that mental illness was caused by hidden infections poisoning the brain. To cure his patients, he ordered the removal of teeth, tonsils, stomachs, colons, and reproductive organs, often performing multiple surgeries on the same person. Many patients died from the operations, with some estimates placing the mortality rate at over 45%. Despite the staggering death toll, Cotton spent years promoting the procedures as a medical breakthrough, while dismissing clear evidence that they were killing the very people he claimed to be saving. Mike Tyson later admitted that he took his famous cameo role in The Hangover while struggling with a severe cocaine addiction, saying he accepted the job mostly for drug money and was so intoxicated he barely remembered agreeing to it. The same year the film was released, Tyson's 4-year-old daughter Exodus tragically died after a treadmill power cord wrapped around her neck at the family's home in Phoenix. Tyson later recalled arriving at the hospital hungover and so overwhelmed with grief that his first instinct was to grab a gun and, quote, go crazy. He said seeing other parents quietly coping with their own dying children is what stopped him, and that Exodus's death ultimately became the turning point that led him to get sober. Tyson later said that had he not gotten clean, he likely would have died himself. In 1978, after North Korean commandos attempted to assassinate South Korean President Park Chung-hee, Unit 684 was secretly created in South Korea to infiltrate the North and kill leader Kim Il-sung. The 31 recruits, many reportedly criminals or men promised money and pardons, were sent to a remote island where they endured years of brutal training involving extreme physical punishment, starvation, and harsh survival exercises that killed 7 members before the mission ever even began. When relations between the two Koreas unexpectedly improved and the assassination mission was suddenly abandoned, the remaining 24 men realized they had effectively become disposable secrets. In 1971, they mutinied, killed several of their guards, hijacked a bus towards Seoul, and exchanged gunfire with the military before most of the unit died in a final shootout and grenade explosion. The 4 surviving members were later captured, court-martialed, and executed. Tyke was a circus elephant that had spent years performing in traveling shows across the United States. Former handlers later claimed she showed repeated signs of stress and aggression after 12 years of harsh training, confinement, and constant transport. On August 20th, 1994, during a live circus performance in Honolulu, Tyke suddenly became agitated and attacked her trainer in front of the audience, killing him and severely injuring another handler before smashing through an exit and escaping into the streets. Panicked bystanders watched as the elephant rampaged through downtown Honolulu for nearly 30 minutes as police chased her through traffic. Officers eventually shot Tyke 86 times before she finally collapsed and died in the street. The incident later became one of the most infamous examples used by animal rights activists campaigning against performances of circus animals. Here's a photo of Filipina resistance leader and former schoolteacher Nieves Fernandez showing a U.S. Army private how she used a bolo knife to kill Japanese soldiers during the occupation of the Philippines in World War II. Fernandez helped lead a guerrilla resistance force after Japan invaded the country and was reportedly so feared by Japanese troops that a bounty was placed on her head. Historical accounts credit her unit with killing more than 200 Japanese soldiers during the war. David Holmes was a longtime stunt double for Daniel Radcliffe during the Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows era, before a horrific on-set accident during a stunt rehearsal in 2009 left him permanently paralyzed. Holmes broke his neck after being violently thrown into a wall while practicing a flying sequence, suffering a catastrophic spinal injury that ended his stunt career at just 25 years old. Despite the life-altering injury, Holmes remained close friends with Radcliffe for years afterward, with Radcliffe later helping to produce the documentary David Holmes, The Boy Who Lived, about his life, recovery, and the devastating accident that changed everything. A popular mushroom in China known as the little white mushroom has repeatedly poisoned people when eaten undercooked, triggering a rare form of toxic hallucination known as Lilliputian hallucinations. Victims reportedly begin seeing swarms of tiny human-like or fantasy creatures crawling under doors, scaling walls, or clinging to furniture as the mushroom's toxins affect the brain. The bizarre poisonings became so notorious in parts of China's Yunnan province that hospitals documented countless unrelated people describing nearly identical visions of miniature elf-like figures during their episodes. Just recently, Ed Sheeran revealed he'd been dealing with shingles for about a month, a painful viral infection caused by the reactivation of the chickenpox virus. The outbreak affected his scalp, causing burning nerve pain and blistering rashes severe enough that he shaved his head to manage it. Shingles attacks nerve pathways in the skin, and when it spreads across the scalp, even light contact can cause intense burning. Hair can trap heat, irritate the lesions, and make treatment difficult, so shaving it off helps reduce constant pain and allows medication to be applied directly. While not usually fatal, shingles can leave lasting nerve damage, with some people experiencing chronic pain long after the rash disappears. In Istanbul, Ali Sifsi suffered a catastrophic head injury while confronting a burglar, leaving a large section of his skull fractured and missing, with parts of his brain left dangerously exposed. Emergency surgery stabilized him, but a huge portion of his skull could not be saved. To rebuild it, surgeons performed detailed scans of his remaining skull and designed a patient-specific implant, 3D printing a curved titanium plate to precisely replace the missing bone. During reconstruction, the metal implant was secured directly to his skull, effectively acting as a permanent substitute for the lost bone, protecting his brain while permanently altering the structure of his head. This eerie burial suit from China's Liao dynasty was made between the 10th and 11th centuries, using woven silver wire, a bronze mask, and a metal crown to encase the dead. Elite members of the dynasty were sometimes buried in elaborate metal suits like this, because it was believed they could help preserve the body and protect the soul in the afterlife. A 700-year-old statue of the Hindu god Ganesha sits perched on top of Indonesia's active Mount Bromo volcano, where it has overlooked smoke, ash, and eruptions for centuries as part of a sacred ancient site used by local Tenggerese worshippers. In 2024, researchers using LiDAR scans in Ecuador's Upano Valley revealed the hidden remains of a massive 2,500-year-old civilization buried beneath the Amazon rainforest, including huge networks of roads, plazas, homes, and agricultural structures that had remained completely concealed under dense jungle for centuries. Archaeologists say the site is so enormous that only a small portion has been studied so far, and future excavations could uncover far more about the lost civilization and how millions of people may have once lived deep within the Amazon. Actor Jesse Eisenberg donated one of his kidneys to a complete stranger in 2025 after learning more about the organ shortage crisis. During the operation, doctors discovered the intended recipient had become too sick to receive the transplant, so Eisenberg's kidney was redirected to a different stranger elsewhere in the country. He never learned the recipient's identity, recovered without major complications, and later said he had no regrets, joking that he wished he had more kidneys to give. In 1943, Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann became the first person to intentionally take LSD after accidentally being exposed to it days earlier in a laboratory. Believing the amount was insignificant, he swallowed 250 micrograms, a dose now considered to be extremely powerful. Within a few hours, Hoffman was plunged into a waking nightmare. He experienced overwhelming hallucinations, felt his body and mind breaking apart, became convinced he'd been poisoned, and feared he was permanently losing his sanity. At one point, he believed he was dying and that the world around him had transformed into something sinister and unrecognizable. The 6-hour ordeal became the first documented LSD trip in history and is now remembered as Bicycle Day, after the ride home during which the drug's effects had reached their terrifying peak. Scientists created this eerie ghost heart by stripping a real heart of every living cell, washing away the blood, tissue, and DNA until only a translucent white protein scaffold remained. Researchers can now inject the empty structure with stem cells in hopes of growing a functioning replacement organ that the body may eventually recognize as its own. Horses have almost no muscle below their knees, meaning their lower legs rely heavily on movement to circulate blood. Because of this, their hooves essentially act as second hearts, helping pump blood back up the leg every time they walk. If a horse becomes unable to stand or move after a serious leg injury, blood flow can fail, causing tissue damage and breakdown that can slowly spread upward from the hoof. This is one reason why severe leg injuries is often fatal in horses. In 1979, 6-year-old Ethan Pates disappeared after convincing his parents to let him walk alone to his Manhattan school bus stop for the first time. He never made it onto the bus, and his case became one of the most infamous child disappearances in U.S. history after his photo became the first ever printed on milk cartons nationwide. Ethan's body was never found, but in 2017, former convenience store worker Pedro Hernandez was convicted of kidnapping and murdering him nearly 38 years later. Hernandez confessed to luring Ethan into a basement with the promise of a soda before strangling him. But his defense argued he suffered from severe mental illness and gave a false confession. He was ultimately sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Ty Pennington nearly died after ignoring what he thought was just a sore throat for over a month. In 2023, the infection turned out to be a massive throat abscess that became so severe it started blocking his airway, leaving him struggling to breathe. Pennington was rushed to the ICU, intubated, and flown to another hospital for emergency surgery. He later said doctors told him he easily could have died if he waited any longer to get treatment. In the early days of cars, drivers who killed pedestrians were often blamed for what newspapers called motor killings. But as deaths began to rise in the 1920s, automobile companies pushed the term jaywalker to shift blame onto pedestrians, helping normalize the idea that people hit by cars were at fault for their own deaths. The Cave Creek disaster occurred in 1995 at Paparoa National Park in New Zealand, when 17 people crowded onto a newly built viewing platform overlooking Cave Creek on a field trip. The structure suddenly tore away from the cliffside and collapsed forward, sending the group plunging nearly 40 meters onto the rocks below. 14 people were killed, most of them university students, while the survivors suffered devastating injuries. Investigators later discovered the platform had been catastrophically poorly built, with several missing bolts and critical structural flaws. However, no individual was ever criminally convicted over the disaster. Steve Irwin spent his entire life working hands-on with animals that could kill him, and he openly said that if he ever died, it would likely be from wildlife. Throughout his career, he was constantly bitten, cut, and injured by snakes, lizards, and crocodiles. There were multiple close calls where crocodiles snapped inches from his body. He regularly handled some of the most venomous snakes in the world in remote areas, where a single bite could have easily been fatal before help arrived. This was one of the last photos ever taken of Steve off the coast of Queensland in 2006 before a stingray struck him with its tail, sending a barb through his chest and directly into his heart. Fatal stingray injuries like this are extremely rare, with fewer than 20 documented deaths worldwide since the 1950s. The barb was quickly pulled out during the emergency, which likely accelerated the bleeding, but the damage to his heart was already catastrophic either way. The moment was caught on camera, and the footage was reportedly destroyed before it was ever released. According to those present, his final words were reportedly, "I'm dying," before he went into cardiac arrest. The stingray is believed to have acted defensively as Steve approached from above. Despite decades of surviving encounters with some of the most dangerous animals on Earth, Steve died from a single rare defensive strike, the exact kind of risk he had always accepted.